How the heck do you come up with names for a fantasy book or just any book in general? So hello, my name's Stefan. I'm a fantasy writer. I'm also a substitute teacher, so I do a little bit of everything on the side. And one of the things I love doing is I love teaching English, and I love kind of teaching about some of the little elements and some of the nitty gritty, how to actually come up with idea stuff. And granted, one of the things that I've realized is this is kind of a hard process, just writing a book in general. There are so many little things that a lot of people don't really think about. There are a lot of little things that just suddenly come up, and so many questions. And believe it or not, one of the things that I get asked the most is, how do you come up with names? How do you come up with character names? How do you come up with place names? How do you come up with just really anything that sounds really cool? How do you actually get about that? And so for this video, I thought I'd go into that process just a little bit. But before we do that, if you are writing a fantasy book and you're finding yourself kind of struggling in that area, allow me to show this. Now, like I said, I'm a substitute teacher, so I hear a lot of stuff. I think about a lot of things, and I try to find ways to put information in a form that you can actually understand. And so while I was teaching one of my classes, one of my students said that they had some issues with trying to figure out English and how to understand how to do an English class. And that got me thinking, if there are people that are asking that question now, there are probably more people out there. So I decided to create a book about it. Go figure. And I broke this book into kind of three main areas of focus. And the first area naturally is going to be characters, because characters are kind of important. Second area is going to be setting, because again, setting is kind of important. And then the third area is the antagonist, because every story needs some kind of conflict, some kind of thing to oppose the protagonist. Otherwise, there's not really much of a story at all. And believe it or not, that is the definition of the antagonist. So I made that, and basically this book helps you figure out how to create characters, but also go into a little bit more depth on what makes a character fun and unique, what makes settings interesting, how to make your world just a little bit more fantastic, what kind of things to look for when you're talking about a protagonist. But in the back, one of the things that I also include, because a lot of people actually have this question, is how the heck do you create fantasy maps? So in this particular book, you see obviously how to create a fantasy map. And basically with this one, I just show various techniques. Oops, hold on. Focus. There we go. Gotta love the way the lighting works. And it's various techniques, and it's going to take you, and as far as this one goes, we're just using this kind of map here. This is just one that was completely created for the sole purpose of this book, and literally the whole thing starts off just with that. So if that is something that you are interested in, I will definitely be doing videos about that. But however, if you are in here right now, you are probably wanting to figure out how to write that fantasy book anyways, in which case we'll go into that. And you might just be here for the sake of how to come up with names. And so without further ado, here's how we do it. So the first thing to think about when it comes to names, a lot of people think you got to start with the name. You got to come up with the name before you come up with the character. And in some cases, this absolutely works. Some people, they have a really cool idea in the back of their mind. Some people, they have a name of someone that they really care about, or a name that really matters a lot to them, and so they want to use that as their main character. So the first thing that I would think about is, what kind of influences do you have? What kind of people are important? What kind of people have things that you value? When you have a person that's a really cool person, that name is suddenly going to have a much cooler meaning in your mind, and that character's name might be just a very special name that you want to use for your book. On the other hand, if you have, for example, a high school or junior high bully, the name of that bully might not be a very good name, or you might want that name to be used as an antagonist. So take inspiration from the life that you are already experiencing. You might have read in a book there's a character that you absolutely love, and so you wanted to make that character's name your main character's name. It's also possible that, again, you're reading a book and you found a character that you absolutely thought needed to have a little bit more go into them, but you really thought the character wasn't done justice, and so you want to redeem that name. And so, then you go through and you say, I'm going to name my main character this one here. Well, another thing to think about when it comes to names, especially historically, but names had meaning. The name that a person was given, that was almost a prophecy on who they were going to be. And my name, for example, my name is Stefan. Stefan is the only correct spelling for that. Don't even get me started on that. But, so my name, when you look into the actual definitions, it means crowned one. And for a long time, I thought, okay, that means prince. Well, then I looked a little bit deeper, and the actual meaning is not the crown of royalty, but it was crown as terms the kind of the crown of laurel leaves that was presented to a victor upon completing a great event. So in the sense, the crowned one isn't so much royalty as it is victor. And I really kind of like that meaning a lot, and it kind of changed a lot of how I saw myself when I thought before just royalty prince, and then now it means victor. And for some reason, that has changed how I viewed myself. And, that's kind of cool. Well, also historically, parents would name their kids something with the hopes that this would be the name that would become them. You look biblically, there was a lot of meaning behind all of the names, and it is absolutely insane if you go through and actually look at all of it. In some cases, the names, they had to do with some very important event in the person's life. In some cases, they had to deal with some kind of judgment on the people of Israel. In other cases, they were just like Asher. Asher means happy, because Leah was happy when she had Asher. So that's what he named him. So the names can have those kind of meanings. So when you're thinking about your character, one thing that I like to do is I love to go to various websites on behindthename.com, babynames.com, and I'll look at these names, but I'll type in what I want the name to mean. So when I'm looking at a main character, my main character, I might want them to be, I might want them to be strong. I might want them to be courageous. I might want them to be honorable. I'll want them to be, dedicated, passionate, etc., etc. Well, then I go in and I look at names, and I'll just type in for the name meaning. I'll type in courage, and I'll see the list of names that come up from there. Or I'll type in strong, and I'll see the list of names that come up there. And then when I'm going through, and what's really cool is that they'll give a bunch of names for various cultures. So not just the English-sounding names, but we're talking like African, Indian, we're talking, Chinese, Japanese, Korean. I think there's even a few, Spanish, but then you've got some of the island nations, and you got lots and lots of different name meanings in there. And so then I'll go through, I'll look at ones that sound really cool for my fantasy books. I'll take those names, and then I'll just kind of tweak them just a little bit to fit the culture and fit the idea that I'm trying to convey. And then suddenly I now have a new name that has based on that one, because really, let's be real, you'll have a name, you'll have a meaning, and then there will be 50 different variations of that name, so it's perfectly legit. And so then you just go through and just figure out getting something that sounds right. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't really think about too much. What sounds right? If you have a name that just sounds awesome, it doesn't matter what the meaning is per se. If it just sounds amazing, sometimes that alone is enough to go for it. Kind of on that note, though, then you think about stuff like Lord of the Rings, and you get a lot of these names that in the family line are going to be very similar. And so that's the next step that I kind of go with. I'll look at what a character's name is, and then I'll have their brother or their sister or their dad or their mom have names that sound similar so that it's more of a familiar line. And then you can kind of group up names like that. But yeah, a lot of people, I think, don't give enough credit to what sounds good. Because at the end of the day, if you think about if someone is going to talk about your book, someone's going to talk about your character, they're going to care about how that character's name sounds. Case in point, I love the name Luke Skywalker. Skywalker is very impractical for a name, but it just sounds awesome. It just has such a cool just connotation with it. Han Solo. Having the last name Solo is absolutely brilliant. It's so simple, it's so straightforward, it really describes his character perfectly well, but then at the end, it kind of is it kind of makes you think about where the character has gone and how far the character has gone from the really Solo, with the exception of Chewbacca, and then becoming a military leader in the Rebel Alliance. And it's awesome to see how that arc has gone. I love the name Anakin. It's just got a lot of, it's got a really cool sound to it. Obi-Wan, again, I love the sound. Kenobi, yeah. It's like if you think about the Amazon or the Disney Plus series, the Kenobi one, there's just power in that name. And whether that is because of the character itself or because the name itself also is just that cool, well, I'll let you be the judge. But when it comes to names, think about, how it sounds. Think about, also how it looks. Sometimes a name is going to look really cool on the page, and that's going to be it. So another strategy that I like to use when I'm trying to figure out what kind of names even can work is you just start typing and you just hit a few random keys on the keyboard. You see what comes up. Odds are it's going to be a lot of consonants, and then you just go in and you fill in vowels to see what works right. And when you do that, then you start to kind of play around. You start to work the sounds through. You start to look at what looks right. And you might change up a few letters here and there until you finally come up with something that you say, this is it. There's no official way that you have to do things. There's no official way that things are going to have to be. In your story, you can do whatever you want. In your fantasy novel, you can create whatever names you want. In your regular fiction novel, you can create whatever names you want. Again, also, if you're going to be doing a historical piece for some kind of general culture, focused area, pay attention to the names that are used there. I love to look up what are the most popular names in this location for whatever year. What are the most popular names in 1800 as opposed to the most popular names in 1900. They're going to be different because cultures change, people change. And so if you're going for more of a fantasy style, look at some of the older names. Look at some of the classics that people are more interested in using. It'll be a great inspiration. But the thing about when it comes to names, I think naming is probably one of the most fun parts about writing my books. It can also be the most daunting for a lot of people, but I think that if you just figure out a process, figure out something that works for you, you'll find that in the end, the whole thing is going to be a lot more fun and a lot easier. So I hope that this has been, informative. It's about, 14 minutes of informative. I hope this has been beneficial for you guys. I also want to point out that all the stuff that we covered here today, so I mentioned my book again, How to Write a Fantasy Novel, Part 1. This is actually just the first page. And again, I did it the first page because it's important stuff, and a lot of people like to think about these kind of things, and oftentimes people get kind of bogged down. But my suggestion, if you go through and actually do get this book, I would really appreciate it. I'll leave the links down in the comments. But if you actually do, I would encourage you, before even writing in this book, just go through and just read the prompts. Just look at the various ones in there. Like I said, the first one is, has the main character, or where did your main character get their name? Second part is, where did your main character grow up? Then, who are your main character's parents? Etc., etc. So there's a lot of these little things that I ask you to think about when creating your characters. And the whole point of this is to get the ideas going. And again, it's your world. You can create whatever you want, but I encourage you to think about these little back things, because if you do, not only are your characters going to be much more developed for your reader, they're going to be much more developed for you. And you're going to have a much better understanding of who this person is, who these people are, where they're going to be going, what their goals are in life, what their purpose in the story actually is. And sometimes by creating these characters and realizing how incredibly awesome they are, that's going to give you story ideas that you never thought were possible. And I experienced that with mine, with my first book, Firebrand. And now I'm almost done with the second one. I have so many amazing directions that I'm going to go for these guys. I've had to actually narrow it down and just say, I can't go with this one because it doesn't work with, A, B, C, and D reasons. So, yeah, the more that you understand your characters, the more you're going to understand where their story is going to go, and it's going to make your writing time so much more fun, and believe it or not, so much easier. So once again, thank you very much. I hope this was enjoyable, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.